welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. As always, I am Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard. And today we're returning to a new feature that we've got on the channel, which is how we got our shots. And this was something that was suggested by someone who watches the show called Glyn Phillips, who suggested he'd like us to talk more about some of our own photos and analyze both the techniques we were using and why we shot them, why we liked them. We've added a twist to that, is rather than choosing our own pictures, we've chosen each other's pictures. So Matt chose 3 of mine that he wanted to hear about, and I've chosen 3 of Matt's in this episode, which I'm going to quiz him about. So I'm just going to pull them up now. And the first one is actually my favorite shot of Matt's. I think it's just one of my favorite fish portraits that I've seen. It was awarded in UPY, and I'm sure I would have written the caption for it. There's a clue if you ever watch it, reading the UPY yearbook, and you want to know which judges like which pictures, you can see who wrote the captions for them. And that usually tells you who was their big supporter in the judging room. Although this year, the current UPY, just quickly to get sidetracked, is Tobias was ill during the process of producing the yearbook. So I wrote all his captions as well. So if I wrote the captions this year, it was either me or Tobias who loved the shot. Obviously, we all love all the shots, but I meant just specifically. Anyway, what I love about this shot is that it is an absolutely stunning individual creature. The coloration on this batfish is fantastic. The angularity of the fish works brilliantly with the symmetrical composition, but is really made by the crossed lighting on it that just brings out that shape. And the harshness of the lighting, I think, fits so well with the harsh angularity of the body. And then just that whole, I can't believe an animal that looks like this exists, with all these straight lines and straight edges. It's kind of the engineer's fish. So that's why I love it, Matt. But tell us what you used to shoot it and why you love it as well.
So I shot this in 2019 with an ancient, still ancient even then, 2022, with a Nikon D700, a vintage camera at this point, and the Nikon 60mm macro. So we've talked about it in previous episodes that the 60mm range on full frame is kind of my favorite go-to focal length for local diving, because I shot this here in Florida. Because a lot of the subject matter we have that I prefer to shoot is a bit bigger, and we don't have the best visibility, so the 105 is sometimes a bit of overkill. But found this long-nosed batfish. It's the only one I've ever seen. It is one of the 2 rarer species of batfish we have here. There's 3 that are relatively common, and then 2 that are, one that's really rare, this guy, and then one that's almost impossible, and that's the pancake. So long-nosed batfish, we hadn't seen anything on this entire dive, and then finally stumbled across this fantastic little being, just perched perfectly on the bottom. Normally, batfish, anyone who's shot them knows that they are almost impossible to photograph head on, because as soon as you line up on them, they turn their back on you. They turn their back on you. So once in a while, they'll sit there, but the easiest way to do it is to set your lighting up somewhere else and then bring it over to the batfish. Hope you get one head-on picture before the games begin, and all of the frustration sets in.
So that must have been hard to do, though, when finding something so rare and exciting.
Oh, yes.
I just want to get a few shots in the bag,
So I had my girlfriend watch the fish like a hawk after I found it. After I lost my mind too, I was screaming through my regulator because I knew right away what it was. I love all batfish, but this is the only one I've seen. And their nose, it's actually a bit distorted here. Their nose is substantially longer than it looks right there, hence the long-nosed batfish name. And I found a little rock, or maybe piece of coral nearby that was roughly the same size. So I went and got my lighting set up. I had 2 of the original retro flashes, which are still my favorite macro strobe, because when they have no diffusers on them, they put out a pretty harsh light, which is good for this kind of subject matter or this kind of lighting style. I had reduction rings on, which help further cut light out. So I moved the strobes straight out and angled them across at each other. And the theory was the batfish would be in between the 2 strobe heads with the light cutting straight across, which is cross lighting. It's my favorite thing to do. It brings out lots of cool textures and shadows, shows off shapes really well. And in this case, it helps blur out or black out the background. And I know you guys can hear Naya.
Yeah, but she's excited about the batfish too. So,
hey, Naya.
I think it's a really interesting lesson though, because this is an amazing subject and it's an amazing shot, and I'm hearing more the backstory again makes me really proud that we picked it out as judges to award in UPY for all those reasons. But it must be I think it reflects very well on your photographic approach, that finding an almost kind of once in a lifetime type subject, you had the presence of mind to remember your sort of photographic approach and go away and quietly get on with getting the shot right.
Yeah, I mean, because it's one of those things where with this guy, it's either sure you might risk him. You typically don't move very fast, so you would risk him swimming away, or you risk swimming up, and he might sit there for your one frame, and you've messed up the lighting or the settings or something, and he bails after that, and you're screwed anyway. So I figured he'd probably sit there if we left him alone.
Yeah, that's good call.
He did. He let me get one head-on shot and then one kind of 45-degree profile, and then it was just he was done. And that's typically how it goes with batfish. But yeah, the crazy shape. They're very angular. They're very angular. I apologize to everybody. I thought I tired her out this morning. Apparently I didn't. But you can actually see its little lure tucked up there underneath its nose. And one cool thing about batfish that I learned, and I hope I'm right about this, is that their lure isn't a visual attractant, it's chemical. So they'll bounce it out underneath their nose and cast some sort of scent into the water and draw prey to them that way, instead of like a frogfish where it's visual and they kind of do this thing to lure fish closer.
Well, I guess the fact that they're often quite deep water batfish, there's probably not that much light anyway. So I would think the movement of it as well, obviously everything in the sea is very sensitive to sound and vibration. And so probably the movement really helps pull things in as well. But yeah, it's an absolute, and I also, we didn't really comment about it, but the color combination of the blue eyes and the red body, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. This one I was always going to choose.
And plus that little sad little smile.
Yeah.
Smile. That sad little mouth is also awesome. Every batfish has that grumpy look on them, but the long nose seems to have it more exaggerated because their mouth is much smaller relative to the rest of their face. And turns out, fun fact, batfish eat fireworms, which I've always wondered why they're covered with the bristles, why you see so many batfish with bristles, and I always thought it's just because they're running into fireworms somehow. But we've actually seen them eat them, and it can't be a nutritious meal, and it's got to be pretty spicy, but they'll just walk up to them and slurp them up into their mouth, and it unfortunately happens too fast to probably get pictures of. But it's a really cool thing to see that they just slurp up fireworms like spaghetti.
And then get the CT stuck in their face like that.
Yeah, and then have spikes and spines and stuff all stuck to their lips. But there must be something about the fireworms.
I think you're right. They like their spicy food.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's have a look at the next one, which is, I guess, crossing the continent to the other coast.
Yep.
And are these Chinook salmon? I'm not very good with salmon.
Pink salmon.
Pink salmon. Okay.
Yeah.
And I love this photo because of the textures, the feeling. And what I like about the textures in this shot is that you see lots of pictures of textures, but the textures here just really speak to me of flowing water, and that's that just works so well in this picture. Because of that feeling of movement. And then I like the fact that the flash right in front of the subject has frozen a few of the bubbles as well. So you you understand what's creating those streaks. And it's a really interesting shot as a result. Tell us a bit about this shot. And I know from my own experience that it can be quite physical shooting salmon because of the cold, fast running water is really hard to stay still in. So camera and a bit of story, please.
So this was D500, 2 original retro flashes with diffusers this time, and the Nikono's 13 millimeter, which on a crop sensor I think was like 110 degrees. So it's far from a full fisheye, but I found for the salmon it was awesome. Especially with pink salmon, they're not one of the bigger species, and even though you can get close, the bit of a crop down using the smaller sensor was really helpful.
I used to use that combo, the RS13 on the crop sensor camera. I used it on a white shark trip in Guadalupe when we could go, and it was perfect for that again because although the sharks are big, they don't always come all that close, and you could shoot it really wide open, so it was really good for shooting them at distance. Even when it started to get a bit dark underwater, your strobes would reach. So yeah, really nice combo using that lens on a crop sensor when you've got that.
Yep. So, like you said, though, the salmon, their habitat's very chaotic, especially when they're moving upriver to spawn. Those rivers rip. They are very fast moving. I don't know how any salmon makes it up them. But my whole goal over the course of that shoot was to try to emphasize the movement in the pictures and show that it's a constantly flowing, very chaotic place. And ironically, I didn't process this picture until 3 years after I shot it because it just sat in the folder and I just never really looked at it. And then one day I was like, hey, that looks kind of cool. And now it has turned into my most successful competition picture and one of my favorite personal images. And I just love the fish seems to be going against the way or against the direction of the bubbles, which is also strange because it had turned around and was going downriver.
Okay.
Really quickly. And you can see some of the other salmon are kind of bumping their way into the frame. But arguably the most fun I've ever had underwater in a day was just, I weighted myself down with probably 70 pounds of lead, wedged myself into the rocks, and had just thousands of pink salmon flowing by.
And were you scubaing or just...
I was with Iko Jones, who some people might know. He was filming topside. I did a 4-hour dive on a tank in like 3 feet of water.
You must have been cold after that.
Yeah, but you don't even notice it because my adrenaline was going the whole time.
No.
So I drained that tank, got out. He was still filming, so I went back in on snorkel, which was much harder because then you're at the mercy of the currents as well. And in a dry suit, it's hard to dive down. So most of the successful pictures from that day were on scuba, and then a couple on snorkel, but scuba was way better. And even if you're in a couple feet of water, it makes all the difference to be able to not have to pick your head up and to be able to weigh yourself down with tons and tons of lead.
The question I want to know, which is probably no one else wants to hear about, but were you there at a time when they were migrating, or were they spawning and dying still at that stage? I'm asking really for the smell stories.
They were, so when we first got there, I was convinced we weren't going to see any alive because the whole bank of the river and even into the water was carcasses of salmon.
Yeah.
But it was really odd because there were so many dead ones. There were some that were still spawning. There were some that were still fighting upriver. There were some that were swimming and like all of the skin had rotted off their face and they're still alive. Then there were some that looked completely healthy. And that was one of the other cool things is that even if you photograph all the salmon, then you can go look for individuals that have really gnarly, unfortunate aesthetics. And I know I have a picture of one where all of the skin is gone from his face. It's all just like the flesh, and then I think his spine is showing too through on his back. And it's remarkable how long they can actually survive, essentially with holes completely through their body. I don't know how they're doing it, but they are that determined to get upriver and spawn the next generation. But if anyone has the chance to do a salmon run, it is a ton of fun. And a little plug here, I am running a salmon trip to Alaska next year if anybody wants to come. So,
wow. Oh, cool.
I think it's on my website. It's definitely on the website.
I'd love to do that.
Yeah. So it's salmon and bears, sockeye and pink salmon, I believe, and then big old grizzlies. Hopefully not at the same time, but it should be a lot of fun. But I've only done pink and chum, so I'm looking forward to doing some sockeye and
the sockeye are really pretty. That's what I've done.
The chum are
They still smell bad though.
They do all smell bad. Fortunately, I was wearing a mask all day, even when I got out of the water.
Yeah, but just just the smell on the dry suits and everything. It just got everywhere, that smell. Horrible.
It's a very, if you're into freshwater stuff, it's a very productive day if you can hit a salmon run right, because they're right in front of your face and they forget you're there within 10 seconds of you getting in the water, and then you can watch them do their thing as they fight their way upstream.
Yeah, I'd love to do more of that stuff.
And settings for this,
Oh yeah.
ISO 160, 1/10 of a second, and f9, which the old 13 doesn't record properly, so I think that's probably like f6 or
I've
something
got
like
my
that.
lookup list over to the side here. Yeah. F9, f7.1 according to my lookup list.
So
I have that on my desk just there for whenever I'm like posting up when I was there because I use that lens so much. Whenever I was posting a picture online, I'd always like glance across what the settings are. Yeah, there we go. I don't need it anymore because obviously
yeah,
with the
that's true.
Sony conversion, the lens finally records correctly, and as a
Yeah.
result, you can obviously use it in auto modes as well, which is really cool. If you need to. Fantastic. Let's move on to the final one, which is a real favourite of mine. I think this is maybe a more recent shot,
Yeah.
but this is a real favourite of my shot because of your shots of mine because I love the guards. I think they're just one of the most amazing looking fish, and to shoot one so close to the camera with such beautiful light behind it is something really special. Certainly in my experience. So I think having such an amazing fish in such an amazing setting is absolutely stunning. So how did you get so close? How did you get such a great background?
So this is a long-nosed gar. We have technically 4 species in Florida. There's only 2 realistically that you can photograph. There's Florida gar, which is the common one. They stay much smaller, maybe about max out at about 2 feet, and they have a much stubbier snout. And then long-nosed gar, which can be up to 6 feet, and they have a
Wow.
much longer, as you can see, much longer nose.
Mm.
But they are far less common. So their numbers also seem to be dropping. So if you see one anywhere, it's a pretty special thing. So my friend works for the Florida Springs Institute, and he got us permission one day he was going out to do a survey. He asked if I would like to tag along, and in a place that normally doesn't allow swimming or snorkeling. So obviously I jumped at that. It meant getting up at 2 a.m. and driving 4 hours to go meet him. But it was absolutely worth it. The entire river there is spring fed, and unlike most of them that have a main spring and then nothing else, this one has a bunch of different spring heads. So the entire river length is
And it stays
crystal
clean then.
clear.
Yeah.
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 So you have 100+ foot visibility everywhere you are.
Wow. What
And
a
in a
place.
couple, it's awesome. It's one of the like again one of the best days of shooting I've had just for the aesthetics of being there. So we had done a bunch of manatees early, and then he asked if I wanted to go try to find some long-nosed gar. So we went and hopped down at another spring head, and there were 5 or 6 hanging around. Most of them were pretty small, and then this one was a beast. She was probably over 5 feet, but they're
Wow.
very skittish. And we were on free dive. I'm not a great free diver. So the challenge was diving down and getting close enough to her on the same breath, and then getting a picture before I ran out of air or she decided that I was too close. So I counted, I think I did 14 dives over the course of an hour trying to get down to her. And the very last picture I shot of the day was this one. I dove down, she let me get close, and she turned just enough to give me that nice profile. And what I had been doing, and I probably would have gotten some shots sooner, was I wanted to get her with the sunbeams in the background, and I could only get that facing one direction. So the trees were growing over top of the spring, which split, like we talked about in your episode with the
Yeah.
bike.
Yeah.
The trees split the sunbeams, which made it really nice and actually kind of illuminated the grasses in a nice way. And then she obliged on the very last picture of the day, made that nice turn with the sunbeams in the background. And as I gasped for gasped for air, managed to make one picture and get back to the surface. But shot with the Sony A9, Nikonos 13 millimeter, ISO 500, f6.3, 1/100th of a second. Had to go a bit higher ISO than I would have liked, but the beam still showed up, and it gave me that nice bright watercolor, because those springs are very dark. Like they don't necessarily
Yeah.
in the morning, they don't necessarily look dark, and I think the water clarity is kind of to blame for that, because you're like, oh, it's clear water, it must be bright.
But all the
But they're
trees
not.
around them as well really make them. Yeah. It's really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So quite dark. So had to open the aperture, which on the 13 mil on Sony doesn't really matter. You can open it all the way if you need to, and then had to raise the ISO a little bit. But I was really stoked to get a picture of this fish. A, because I've been trying for a while. B, because I love gar, and C, because they're on the decline. So any picture you can get of one now is kind of special.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And yeah, just a beautiful, beautiful subject in a wonderful environment. And yeah, I mean, I have to say, all three shots I liked before, and I feel all three shots I appreciate more having heard the stories behind them, which is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that's a pretty good place for us to wrap this one up. So we'll be back again soon. And thanks for watching the Underwater Photography Show. Goodbye from me.
Thanks, guys.